All right, so what your sheet tells you, what the sheet that I passed out, just to save some writing, what it tells you is how we add and subtract vectors and how we multiply by numbers. So basically the idea is on your sheet, so if we're talking about here, we're talking about operations. The sheet that I pass out gives you all kinds of rules for operations with vectors. If we have two vectors, if we're going to add or subtract two vectors, and that's really all we're doing with vectors in here. If u is u1, u2, and v is the vector v1, v2, if I add the vectors together, u plus v, all I do is add the components. That's u1 plus v1, the vector u1 plus v1, u2 plus v2. So I add the x components, I add the y components. If I subtract the x components and I subtract the y components. I'm doing the subtracting component by component. If we multiply by a scalar, we call a real number, c is a scalar, to tell the difference between a vector. A scalar is just a real number. A scalar times u is just the vector, the scalar times each component. So I just multiply each component of the vector by a scalar, by the number. And what this gives me is a vector in the direction of u that is this many times as long. I just make the vector this many times as long. So an example, we'll do a quick example and then we will be done. An example, if we have u, my u vector is negative 5, 2, and v is 6, negative 3. I'm going to do some operations here. For u, is just 4 times the vector 4 times negative 5. Guys, 4 times negative 5, 4 times 2. So I get the vector negative 28. U plus v is the vector negative 5 plus 6, 2 plus negative 3. And I get the vector 1, negative 1. So I'm just adding the components. U minus v is just the vector negative 5 minus 6, 2 minus negative 3. And this gets me negative 11, 5. And the sheet that I gave you tells you the different properties, what happens if we switch the order, associative, commutative property, distributive property, all those kinds of things. All right, any questions? So the homework tonight is just going to be finding lengths of vectors and adding and subtracting vectors. Should be nice and easy. All right, there's your homework.